Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Friday morning. Firstly, may I say how lovely it is to see you, and thank you for being with us today. May I also apologise for the lack of talks this week. I've been on a conference with 250 other vicars this week. It's been a good week, actually, but it was difficult to do talks while I was away. But anyway, I'm back today, and we are resuming our adventure through the remarkable book of Joshua. So, without further ado, Joshua chapter 9. Now, when all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland, all along the coast of the Great Sea towards Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this, they gathered together with one accord to fight Joshua and Israel. When the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning. They went and prepared provisions and took worn-out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, and with worn-out patched sandals on their feet and worn-out clothes. And all the provisions were dry and mouldy. They went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the Israelites, "We've come from the far country, so now make a treaty with us." But the Israelites said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you live among us. Then how can we make a treaty with you?" They said to Joshua, "We are your servants." And Joshua said to them, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" They said to him, "Your servants have come from a very far country, because of the name of the Lord your God, for we've heard a report of him, of all that he did in Egypt, and of all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites, who are beyond the Jordan, King Sihon of the Heshbon, and King Og of Bashan, who lived at Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, 'Take provisions in your hand for the journey. Go and meet them, and say to them, "We are your servants. Come now, make a treaty with us. Here is our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses, and as our food for the journey, on the day we set out to come to you, but now it's dry and mouldy. These wineskins were new when we filled them, and see, they are burst, and these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey." So the leaders partook of their provisions and did not ask direction from the Lord. So Joshua made peace with them, guaranteeing their lives by a treaty, and the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. But when 3 days had passed after they had made a treaty with them, they heard they were with their neighbours and lived among them. So the Israelites set out and reached their cities on the third day. Now the cities were Gibeon, Chephethara, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But the Israelites did not attack them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then the congregation murmured against the leaders, but all the leaders said to the congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Now we must not touch them. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live, so that wrath may not come upon us, because of the oath that we swore to them." The leaders said to them, "Let them live." So they became hewers of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, as the leaders had decided concerning them. Joshua summoned them and said to them, "Why did you deceive us, saying, 'We are very far from you,' when in fact you are living among us? Now therefore you are cursed, and some of you shall always be slaves, hewers of wood and drawers of water from the house of my God." They answered Joshua, "Because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land, and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. So we were in great fear of our lives because of you, and did this thing. And now we are in your hand. Do as it seems good and right in your sight to us." This is what he did to them. He saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. But on the day Joshua made hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord, to continue to this day in the place that he should choose. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, so just sort of set the scene so far. So Joshua led the people of Israel over the River Jordan into the Promised Land. And so far, things have gone well for them. Before they'd gone, a little bit of backstory, before they even crossed the Jordan, they had taken on Og, king of Bashan, and the other fellow as well. And they defeated them. And they come into the Promised Land now, and they defeated the Jerichoites at Jericho, and they defeated the Aiites at Ai. And obviously, rumour of the great things that God was doing get around the land. So at the beginning, you have quite a few of the kind of Jevites and Hibusites, all the people that were in there already, gathered together because they kind of saw these people coming, saw the Israelites coming, and they gathered together to fight against them. But the one exception to this are the Gibeonites, who took a rather different approach. So rather than joining their friends in fighting against the Israelites, they kind of said, look, these people are coming. The Lord their God is on their side. We don't stand a chance. Let's try and find a different approach. What they did instead is they dressed up like foreigners like very poor people, and they dressed up like foreigners from abroad, and they kind of went to Joshua and the Israelites and said, look, we're just poor foreigners from abroad, and please take pity on us, and we've heard what a great God you have, and so on and so on and so on. Please, please don't kill us. And then, interesting enough, without consulting God, Joshua and his friends formed, sort of felt sorry for them, made a pact with them. And then when they realized what they'd done, it was kind of too late, because a pact had been made. And so when it came to taking on the Gibeonites in the land, they couldn't destroy them, because they'd kind of promised that they wouldn't, and a vow's a vow, so you have to kind of keep with that. So it's a fascinating story, and there's all sorts of moral dilemmas to be discussed in here. I think there are a few things that we can learn from this, however. Firstly, the importance of consulting God before we do what we do. I mean, it is quite clear that when the Gibeonites approached Joshua and so on, they made the pact without consulting God. And in the end, that was been recognised from their point of view as being a mistake. But so it does kind of reflect the importance, as always, of consulting God before we make decisions, especially serious big decisions like that. So the first thing to say is the lesson to be learned of the importance of consulting God, trusting God, and doing what God wants before we make major decisions. That's the first thing. Second thing, the behavior of the Gibeonites is fascinating here. Firstly, in their favor, they could see what was going on. They could see that God was great. They could see what God was doing, and they could see God at work in his world, and they could see what God was doing, and they could see that otherwise they didn't stand a chance. So in their favor, they recognized who God is. They weren't Israelites, they weren't the in crowd, but they could see who God was, what God was doing, and therefore you can't stand against him. So they did see God for who God is. Also, they demonstrated quite a considerable degree in cunning. And it's quite interesting, because we tend to think of cunning as dishonesty. And in a sense, to some extent it was. But also to say that Jacob, let's not forget, was the word Jacob means cheat. And that Jacob himself, the father of the nation, had actually back in the book of Genesis, treated his brother Esau appallingly. But in a sense, he was so keen to get the blessing. He was so keen to get what God had for him. He was prepared to use cunning to do that. And again, I think there's a lesson for us today about the importance of, if we want what God wants, if we want God's blessing, then we have to go all out to get it. And here these people, they demonstrated cunning in order, you might say Jacobite type cunning, to try and get what was, to try and get what was right, get what they could from God. So, and I think we need to learn from that. There's parables in the New Testament, such as the parable of the dishonest steward and so on, where Jesus himself commends cunning and so on. So next time you watch Blackadder, think a bit like that. The importance of, they were prepared to use, they could see who God is. They were also prepared to use cunning in order to get the blessing, and all, because they could see what was coming to them. There's also in here a fascinating study here about what to do when we kind of make mistakes, because the Israelites realized too late, after they'd made this pact with the Gibeonites, they realized the mistake that they'd made, and that they manifestly hadn't consulted God before they come to this accommodation with the Gibeonites, before they realized that they'd been duped and the Gibeonites had got one over on them. They had to kind of accommodate them later. And we can think what we like about the particular accommodation that they made. But in a sense, there's always a way back, isn't there? That with God, that we can make mistakes, and we all do. I mean, he's look back, and of course, you and I, if we'd been Joshua, we wouldn't have made that mistake. We'd have consulted God, wouldn't we? Of course they would. You get the picture. Actually, we all make mistakes, but there is always a way back. And in God, however far we stray, there's always a way back. And God also has a terrific way of turning mistakes into good. How did the old song used to say? He turns our weaknesses into his opportunities, and he can make our mistakes and turn them around into something which is good for him. And in the end, yes, they did make a mistake, but to be fair to the Israelites, a vow is a vow is a vow. They'd made a vow. They weren't going to break it. They promised the Gibeonites they wouldn't destroy them, so they didn't. And they come to this kind of accommodation with them. So I think it shows that however far we stray, and we all do make mistakes, that there is kind of always a way back. So this is an intriguing little chapter, stuck in the middle here in the book of Joshua. It's fascinating. Firstly, the importance to us of making sure that we consult God before we make big decisions. Secondly, to see that the Gibeonites, although they were foreigners, and so on, they weren't part of the in crowd, you might say. They could see what God was doing and they had faith in God. Thirdly, they were prepared to show cunning in order to get what they wanted, God's blessing in their own way. And they were prepared to use cunning to do that. And that's always kind of really important too. But also to show, and the importance that we need to have of being keener and more utterly intent and focused on doing everything we can to get what God has for us. And I think we need to get more of that in our lives. But fourthly, also to say that however much we mess up, there is always a way back. They made an accommodation with the Gibeonites having made their mistake, but there was a way and they turned it around. Friends, have a lovely weekend. We'd love to see you at church. If you're around, you'd be extremely welcome. We'd be a better congregation with you in it. We'd love